Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's 2019 Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Category 3 Orientation Webinar. My name is Allison Upton, and I'm a project manager here at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I will be moderating today's webinar, which is hosted by the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance. To give you an overview of today's webinar, first we'll do introductions of our panelists and provide an overview of the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, or JMHCP as we usually say. And we will specifically focus in on Category 3. We will also provide information about the technical assistance process for grantees, including the Planning and Implementation Guide. Next, we'll hear from two JMHCP grantees who will share information about their grant projects and experience on the ground. And toward the end of the webinar, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Anytime during the webinar, you can ask a question by typing the question into the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. This includes both technical and content-related questions. We'll try to reply to technical questions in the chat window as we go. And for the content-related questions, we'll keep a running list and address them at the end of the webinar. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you encounter any technical or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239, 866-229-3239. Please understand that there are some technical issues that you may not be able to resolve. We are recording this webinar, and we will be able to send a link to the recording out to attendees most likely by the end of next week. So for introductions of our panelists, first, we have Karen Chappell, who's the Executive Vice President of Operations at Coastal Horizons Center Incorporated, where she's a member of their management team. She offers support and guidance to 6 different program teams: the Open House, Youth, Shelter, and Residential Services, the Rape Crisis Center, the North Carolina Treatment Alternatives for Safer Communities, or TASC for short, so the TASC Training Institute, TASC services in 53 counties, Recidivism Reduction Services in 15 counties, and Reentry Systems for Effective Treatment, or Project Reset, in New Hanover County, North Carolina. She is involved in expansion of the corporation, Coastal Horizons, and provides leadership with state agencies, the legislature, and at the national level. Karen joined the corporation in 2001 with over 20 years in nonprofit management. Our next presenter is Dr. Holly Howitt, who is the Executive Director of Beacon Community Connections, a not-for-profit focused on creating and strengthening connections. Excuse me. She is the former Executive Director of the Lafayette Parish Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee and still facilitates its Justice and Health Collaborative. Through the collaborative, she successfully led a team to develop a pre-arrest diversion plan pardon me, for a 2017 Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Grant, and she's actively working on a 2018 JMHCP grant now to implement that plan. Her work in criminal justice has focused on using collaboration, communication, and connections to develop cross-systems policies, processes, and programs to improve outcomes for vulnerable populations. Dr. Howitt also serves as the community coordinator for Lafayette Reentry Coalition. She began her professional career as a speech-language therapist and also worked as a research and project director at the Picard Center for Child Development and Lifelong Learning. And I wanted to also mention, unfortunately, Maria Fryer from the Bureau of Justice Assistance was going to be joining us today, but she was called into a last-minute meeting, so she sends her well wishes, but she's not going to be able to join us as a presenter. Our final presenter will be Sarah Wurzburg, my colleague who is a Deputy Program Director in the Behavioral Health Division here at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Sarah oversees the technical assistance for the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program and the Second Chance Act co-occurring disorders programs. She is the lead for substance addiction in our agency. Previously, Sarah was a research analyst at the National Association of State Alcohol and Drug Abuse Directors, where she authored research reports and led youth and women's services. So I want to say thank you to all the presenters for joining the webinar. So just a little bit about the Bureau of Justice Assistance. We do this work, of course, with funding through the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Office of Justice Programs, which we would like to just tell you a little bit about and its mission. At BJA, the mission is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. More specifically, BJA provides funding to support law enforcement, combat violent and drug-related crime, and combat victimization. Through the development and the implementation of policy, services, and sound grants management, BJA strengthens the nation's criminal justice system and restores security in communities. And as recipients of this JMHCP award, you each share a common goal to effectively serve people with mental illnesses and co-occurring disorders in your local jurisdictions and to create positive, systems-wide change alongside many other professionals across the nation. We're very excited to have you here to talk a bit more about Category 3 implementation and expansion, to really focus on your unique goals and needs. So now I'm going to give some background on the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The Justice Center is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that combines the power of a membership association representing state officials in all three branches of government with the expertise of a policy and research team focused on assisting others to attain measurable results. Our staff develops research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. This slide reflects a bit more about our work style and how we strive to reflect Justice Center core values, which include a commitment to being independent and nonpartisan in every aspect of our work. Pardon me. It includes providing rigorous, trusted, high-quality analysis, developing practical and innovative solutions informed by data and research, promoting collaboration and building consensus, and being inclusive and respectful of diverse views and experiences. As an organization, we really focus on a wide range of areas within the justice system. We pride ourselves in having a deep understanding of the experiences of people at the front line of the justice system and our ability to gather people from both sides of the aisle and across the country to foster collaboration. We promote smart and effective policy and practice changes through in-depth data analysis, on-the-ground training, direct assistance to state and local agencies, and dissemination of best practices and research. And through the JMHCP, BJA aims to help states, local government, and tribal organizations improve responses to and outcomes for people with mental illnesses or co-occurring mental illnesses and substance use disorders who come into contact with the criminal justice system. And BJA also aims to support public safety by facilitating collaboration among the criminal justice, juvenile justice, and mental health and substance use disorder treatment systems. So we'll continue today by discussing the JMHCP Category 3 implementation and expansion in more detail. We'll share a brief overview of this category and provide grantee examples of allowable activities that the JMHCP has funded in the past. So now I'll pass it over to Sarah, who will start us off with some more information about Category 3.
Thank you, Allison. Your cohort for this grant category includes 31 different jurisdictions in 19 different states overall. You can see the blue on the map is the states represented in this year's cohort. We have 9 states with multiple Category 3 grant awards, which presents great opportunity to coordinate within states. These states with multiple grants include California, Iowa, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, North Carolina, New York, Ohio, and Virginia. The implementation and expansion grantees are the most diverse of the JMHCP grant categories. Grantees have a range of focuses, including crisis response by law enforcement, de-escalation tactics such as crisis intervention training, co-responder models, mobile crisis interventions for adults and youth, pretrial diversion, including projects led by public defenders, the creation and expansions of mental health courts, diversion, human trafficking, and juvenile specialty courts, gender-responsive and trauma-informed services for women within jails, the development of new information-sharing platforms, jail and prison-based diversion, mental health first aid and crisis intervention team training for correctional facilities, reentry services for people with co-occurring mental and substance use disorders, and development of specialized caseloads for youth and pretrial supervisees with mental illnesses and co-occurring disorders. Every awardee is doing really interesting work and doing very innovative things. We want you to be able to get to know each other so you can learn a bit more about other programs that might be a focus of other areas of the justice system. Your grant award is for up to $750,000 over a 36-month period or 3 years. The common thread amongst these grantees is developing collaborative strategies across criminal justice and behavioral health system. So everyone's really working to improve outcomes for people with mental illness and substance use disorders, increase efficiencies, and improve public safety overall in your communities. During the initial period of time after the award begins, your grant project will be in phase 1 or the planning phase. There's a planning and implementation guide, or what we call a P&I guide for short, that you'll work on with your TA coach during the planning phase. You'll have up to $150,000 to spend during the planning phase of the grant process. The P&I guide covers a wide range of topics to assist the team through the planning process in collaboration with both behavioral health and justice stakeholders, and in coordination with your TA coach. All of you should have already received an email from your TA coach, and hopefully you're working to schedule calls with them right now. We'll provide more specifics about the guide content in later slides, and we can discuss, and you will also discuss this on your first call with your TA coach in detail. Completion of the guide is estimated to take 6 months from the time of budget approval, so we'll work with you to make sure we can meet those timelines. Once the guide has been approved by BJA, the remaining funds will be released and you will move into the implementation phase. We encourage you to think of the grant project at a systems level, not just about the program or the targeted number of people you propose to serve. We hope that these funds support cross-agency coordination that are a jumping-off point for your jurisdiction's continued work across the justice system to address mental illness and co-occurring disorders. A big part of what makes Category 3, the implementation and expansion grantees of the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, so exciting is the wide range of different activities that you can do under this grant. It's really exciting for us to see what each individual program ends up coming up with. We have a lot of innovative and interesting ideas. On this slide, you can see some of the key focuses areas. There's a big component of training across all areas of the justice system on mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorders. Screening and assessment and identification of people with mental illness are a large focus. Specialized caseloads for community supervision to address mental illness and co-occurring disorders. Case management or service coordination, including connections to benefits, connections to housing, connections to care. Information sharing processes are always a huge topic and often one of the big focuses of our technical assistants. I'm going to take a little bit of time to share more specific examples for each of these different areas to give you a feel for other programs that have done this work. Let's start with the first category of the potential allowable costs, which is training for criminal justice, mental health, and substance use personnel. So the first example is from Minnesota Department of Corrections. They received a grant in 2016, which was an expansion grant, and they were using the crisis intervention training, or CIT training, within their correctional facilities to train officers on de-escalation tactics to support people with mental illness. The team was able to do this, and they conducted an evaluation as well, which surveyed their CIT training participants and found 99% of them expected to use the skills learned in the training, and about 40% estimated they would use the skill at least weekly. So really a big impact when you have almost everyone saying that the training was useful to them. Another possible funding is around screening and assessment and information sharing. The example we have here is from DeKalb County, Georgia. It was a fiscal year 2016 JMHCP grantee, and they used a mental health liaison to help identify girls with mental illness within their court system. And this liaison was able to actually screen every girl that came into the juvenile justice system. So it was a really big change in their entire system, and they were able to go from serving 7 to 40 girls within the system through this effort, and the liaisons were able to help connect them with mental health services and the mental health court docket that was associated with it as well. Another option for use of funds is the development of specialized caseloads for people on supervision. In 2012, there was a JMHCP grantee from Maricopa County, Arizona, and this grantee was working with specialized probation officers for mental health, and also those officers were also working on a gender-responsive caseload for women. So this was a pilot of both a gender-responsive and a caseload for serious mental illness. They had an evaluation that they were able to support that the gender-responsive caseload for serious mental illness did have an impact on lower recidivism rates for these women. Next is case management services and coordination, which are often across every grant category a huge focus. Franklin County Sheriff's Office in Ohio worked to do in-reach services by community-based providers into the correctional facility. They also included a CIT-trained officer that would help do in-reach as well, so they could serve as a community liaison. The in-reach services has really been shown to be a best practice in terms of ability to connect to care. Since 2016, the program has served 258 women. Of those, 151 women have successfully graduated, with only 37 graduates recidivating. They continue to track their outcomes and utilize their data to make program enhancements through a continuous quality improvement process, and they've been able to show really good results. So in addition to using the case management, their data collection has been really stellar as well. Information sharing within and across the justice and behavioral health system is another allowable cost and a really important activity that we know a lot of the new grantees are focused on, thinking through how to address people who might be high utilizers of multiple systems, including homeless services, law enforcement, jails, and really needing that additional care. One of our fiscal year 2018 grantees, El Dorado County, California, is working on this effort. And they are really thinking through how to create a data collection warehouse that will serve as a centralized vehicle to capture data on criminal justice involved people with behavioral health issues They're thinking through how to aggregate and analyze this data and how they can store it in one place in order to help with their decision-making process. In their planning process, the team has been working to determine baseline measures, which is something that you all will think a lot about through your planning and implementation process, including the number of people with mental illness and co-occurring disorders in custody, their length of stay, the percentages of people connected to treatment, the recidivism rate, the connections to system-wide processes, looking at service gaps. So a lot of their data will be used for a lot of different things, and this will be a good mechanism for information sharing as well for them. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the training and technical assistance as well as the planning and implementation guide, which we know everyone is eager to hear about.
Great, thanks, Sarah. The Council of State Governments Justice Center is the training and technical assistance provider, or TA provider, as we usually say for short. So we are the TA provider for 2019 JMHCP grantees. As a JMHCP Category 3 grantee, you'll have a variety of training and technical assistance components available to your team throughout the entire active cycle of your grant. You'll have a TA coach to start with, who will be your main point of contact for technical assistance throughout the entire active cycle of your grant. You will have access to peer learning opportunities, including connection to current and past grantees who might be doing some similar work or maybe have faced similar challenges as your team. You will also have the opportunity to participate in learning communities with other grantees in your same cohort, and more on learning communities in a little bit. You will have access to a variety of tools to assist with your project, including resources about best practices, training opportunities offered by BJA and the Council of State Governments Justice Center, as well as other key partners. If your team is ever interested in obtaining resources on a given topic, I really encourage you to approach your TA coach to assist with this. You will also have access to experts. The TA coaches, other CSG Justice Center colleagues, and even external consultants offer a wide range of content knowledge and expertise that we can bring to the table to assist you in your work. So examples of topics that grantees have been interested in learning about in the past, there are many examples, but just some to give you a sense of it here. Grantees have asked about pre-arrest diversion, gender-responsive services for women, screening and assessment for people with behavioral health needs, information sharing, data collection and evaluation, how to respond to high utilizers of services, and even trauma, wanting to learn more about trauma-informed care. Your TA coaches will be looking out for opportunities to connect you with these experts and resources to support your work. As you can see from this next slide, your TA coach is kind of like a central hub for your team, able to connect you to resources and activities that will support the planning and implementation of your Category 3 project. Throughout the entire grant cycle, each team can expect to have monthly calls with your TA coach, and early in the planning phase, you will be working intensively on the Planning and Implementation Guide, or P&I Guide as we call it for short, which we mentioned is a grant requirement. We strive to be as individualized as possible through the TA processes so that your technical assistance may contain some or all of the components that are shown in this particular graphic. A combination of peer learning, resources, and even an in-person site visit for some grant projects might be a part of your JMHCP technical assistance. Your TA coach will be responsive to each of the grantee team's unique needs and support you in meeting your project goals as well as completing the grant requirements. Next, I'm going to go into some even more detailed information about P&I guides, technical assistance plans, and the learning communities I touched on, since these are always popular topics with grantees. To start with, let's take a look at the Planning and Implementation Guide, or P&I Guide. The CSG Justice Center has prepared the P&I Guide to support grantees in developing and refining their justice and mental health initiatives to improve outcomes for people in the criminal justice system who have mental illnesses or co-occurring disorders. This guide is not intended to serve as a step-by-step blueprint, but rather to foster discussion on best practices, identify considerations for your collaborative efforts, and really to help you work through key decisions and implementation challenges. This guide was developed as a tool for grantees, but it also really serves as an important mechanism for your TA coach to understand the status and progress of your project, the types of challenges you're encountering, and the ways we might be helpful to you in making your project successful. You and your TA coach will use your responses to the self-assessment of the P&I guide to collaboratively develop priorities for technical assistance, to create what we call a technical assistance plan, or a TA plan for short. I will be telling you a little bit more about TA plans in a little bit during this webinar. Getting back to the guide itself, it's divided into 6 topical sections, each with questions, exercises, and discussion prompts. The self-assessment questions and exercises are built on evidence-based principles and emerging practices. You and your team will be prompted to write short responses, attach relevant documents, and complete exercises for each of the 6 sections. Your answers will provide insight into your initiative strengths and also help identify areas for improvement or enhancement. This is all part of the planning process. Discussion of the P&I guide sections is a primary focus of TA calls during the planning phase, and your TA coach is there as a resource to help support your planning processes. Typically, grant teams collaborate across agencies to complete sections of the guide, and then they send them to their TA coach for a review ahead of the monthly call. Then these sections will become a focus of discussion on the call itself to work through questions or challenges or discuss suggested revisions, etc. Some teams like to work differently. Some teams like to complete sections of the guide and send them. Other teams prefer to complete an entire first draft of the guide and then send it to their TA coach. But either way, your TA coach will be flexible with you as you set up a structure and schedule for the planning process. And one important point I'd like to make as you work through the sections of the guide is to really take note of the corresponding supporting resources in the appendices, because they contain suggestions for further reading and provide access to many important resources and tools. Your TA coach may also send you additional information on specific topics to complement certain sections. And if you feel as a team that you need additional information or resources on a topic, please always feel free to reach out to your TA coach and they can assist you as well. Now, to provide some more details on the guide content, I'll touch on each of the 6 sections included in the P&I guide. Section 1, getting started and identifying goals. So section 1 is relatively brief, and it allows the team to enter basic contact information about key partners and to indicate whether there have been any significant changes in the grant project work or staffing, etc., since the time when the proposal was first submitted. This section also includes questions about the grant initiative focus, and it allows teams to describe behavioral health diversion activities occurring in their jurisdiction across all of the criminal justice intercepts. Section 2, developing collaborative partnerships, focuses on the development of these partnerships, inviting the team to consider which key partners and stakeholders are critical to the initiative and the needs of the participants. So, for example, what partners are already at the table? Which stakeholders will need additional outreach to engage? And who will take the lead on that outreach? Section 2 also clarifies the difference between what we at the Council of State Governments Justice Center refer to as an implementation team versus what we call an advisory board. An implementation team consists of those working directly on the grant project, or another way to think about it is the team members that will be in attendance on the monthly TA calls. On the other hand, an advisory board, or what's sometimes referred to as a task force, is the interdisciplinary leadership group that's able to provide feedback on the grant project as a whole, as well as discuss larger systems issues. This advisory group might already be in existence in your community, or you might be creating this group through the grant processes. In Section 2, teams list membership for both of these groups, and they really take the time to take a closer look at the information sharing processes that will be needed between partners and stakeholders. Section 3 includes questions and activities related to defining the target population in your grant program or services, including details such as clinical and legal eligibility, age, gender, and other key demographics. In Section 3, teams will also state the number of people they propose to serve through their grant trainings and interventions. It is BJA's expectation that each team will reach this type of milestone successfully, and your TA coach will help support you in monitoring and achieving this goal. This section also dives deeply into the planning processes related to determining referral sources and information sharing to ensure that grantees have access to the pool of potential participants needed for their initiative. So just to give you a couple of examples of how this might come into play for different types of projects, a law enforcement-focused co-responder project, for example, will want to plan perhaps how dispatchers code calls involving high utilizers of costly services so that ultimately they will be able to help their responses become more efficient and effective across systems. Another example would be, say, a pretrial diversion program or a specialty court who will need to think through the processes that will ensure steady referral streams from key partners so that they will always have a large enough pool of potential participants to enroll. Section 3 also covers any screening and assessment processes used during your grant project in detail. Teams are asked to name their recidivism risk assessment instrument and mental illness and substance use screening and assessment instruments as applicable, and summarize the administration processes of these instruments. So, for example, to detail when and where the instruments will be administered and by whom. Some teams even have developed flowcharts as a visual tool to help them think through these activities. Questions in Section 3 also cover the training and quality assurance processes for these instruments. This piece assists teams to set up practices early on to make sure that your screening and assessment instruments continue to be used with fidelity over time. Moving on through the P&I guide, this next section, Section 4, on identifying evidence-based services and supports is a really exciting one because it really gets into the meat of the work to be offered through your Category 3 initiative. So in Section 4, teams will list the services, interventions, and trainings to be provided with an emphasis on evidence-based and promising practices. So for example, if a team or their partners plan to offer cognitive programming of some type or medication-assisted treatment to program participants, or perhaps they plan to train a certain percentage of their uniformed officers on crisis intervention, they can highlight these services in Section 4. In this section, you will also work through questions related to participant engagement strategies, which is always an important topic, as well as thinking through the levels of care for treatment services that are available in your jurisdiction. Exercises on the topics of healthcare coverage and other benefits as well as public benefits as well as housing are also included here. The focus and common thread in Section 4 is to support planning around needs that are critical to successful behavioral health and public safety outcomes in the community in terms of staff training and enabling participant access to treatment, other support services, medications, and stable housing. The next section, Section 5, as the name suggests, covers data collection and evaluation processes. The JMHCP has a very strong emphasis on data collection and analysis, encouraging the use of data to help inform and drive the JMHCP funded work. On Category 3 projects, teams typically collect data for a variety of purposes, including keeping track of participants and program or training activities, and measuring the grant program's performance as well. Many awardees will conduct a process and/or an outcome evaluation so that they can gauge whether the grant program is operating as intended and whether it's having the intended results. The questions in Section 5 help teams determine what data points and outcomes might be most useful to consider, and then to develop strategies to collect, manage, and analyze this data. Law enforcement-focused teams are asked to consider the patterns that they have observed on mental health calls for service. All Category 3 grantees are invited in this section to consider how they will measure recidivism in their project and what constitutes a successful versus an unsuccessful program completion. If you and your team have an evaluation partner, either internally or externally, they can really be a key resource as you work through this section of the guide. Your TA coach can also connect you to other grantees doing similar work for peer learning on this topic, or they can even provide you with examples of past program evaluations if you're interested. And last in the guide, but certainly not least, is Section 6, excuse me, which focuses on the topic of sustainability. Sustainability of grant-funded services after the cycle has ended can certainly be a challenge, but starting to address this topic earlier rather than later in the grant cycle offers a big advantage, which is the advantage of time. Time to figure out funding options, time to spend outreaching to stakeholders, to plan data collection processes in advance, and to promote the initiatives and its positive outcomes. Discussing sustainability is a key activity to begin in the planning phase, and then also to really continue having it as a focal point to work on throughout implementation. As I mentioned earlier, the P&I guide includes exercises on developing collaborative partnerships in Section 2 and data collection and evaluation in Section 5. And both of these processes are closely linked to sustainability of your grant project. Investigating potential funding streams in your community and learning what outcomes you will need to demonstrate to these potential funders helps teams plan in advance which additional data points they might want to collect or need to collect. In the past, grantees have also come up with many creative strategies to market and sustain their initiatives, including the use of local media, social media of all sorts, and individuals who have come to be champions of their particular grant project work. The final part of the P&I guide is the appendices, which I want to make sure to highlight to you because, as I think I touched on earlier, they include a lot of resources which will be very helpful to your planning process. So towards the end of the guide, there are actually 4 different appendices, and I'm going to detail them for you now. The first appendix includes supporting resources on all the topics covered in the actual 6 sections of the guide. So, for example, you'll see additional resources around screening assessment of co-occurring disorders, screening and assessment of recidivism risk, data collection and evaluation, sustainability, etc. So it sort of mirrors the sections in the guide. The second appendix you will see provides an overview of criminogenic risk and behavioral health needs framework, collaborative comprehensive case management, and system-wide diversion. The third appendix in the P&I guide includes an overview of the police mental health collaboration framework, and the fourth appendix includes an overview of the Stepping Up initiative. And just to repeat a couple of key points, completion of the P&I guide is expected to take approximately 6 months, and it is a JMHCP grant requirement. Your TA coach will work with you to help set the pace and guide you through the planning process. Once P&I guides are submitted and approved by BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance, then BJA will formally shift grantees into the implementation phase, and the remainder of your grant funds will then be released. I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss one additional activity that is key that you'll be working on with your TA coach, which is the Technical Assistance Plan, or TA Plan, as we usually abbreviate it. TA coaches will collaborate with each team to identify needs and goals to work together on through the TA process. Some of the needs might be identified through completion of the P&I guide. The grant team themselves might raise some. Others the TA coach might identify and suggest over time. So, for example, just to give you a couple of examples, team members might be interested in a particular topic, and they might ask the TA coach for resources on that topic, or they might be asked to be connected to other grant teams who have faced similar challenges in their work. So this could become a focus on the TA plan, a goal to work on. Or after listening to particular discussion on a TA call, the TA coach might have an idea and might suggest that connection to an expert to talk through, for example, strategies around information sharing or screening and assessment processes. That connection to that expert might be useful to the team, so that might become a TA plan goal. Or a team might be having a challenge, like they might have difficulty enrolling the number of participants they plan to serve, so perhaps focusing on referral sources, et cetera, and these enrollment processes. Together, the team and the TA coach might decide that this is going to be an area for focus. Whatever way the issues arise, the important point is that we can expect that there's going to be a lot of discussion about the needs and goals of the project during TA calls, and that this information is then used to create like a roadmap of sorts, or the TA plan, which can then be used as a helpful tool to move the grant project forward to achieve its intended objectives. In addition to TA calls, you may be encouraged to attend some of the learning communities that we will host, more on that in a minute, as another opportunity to work on goals with other active JMHCP grantees. These TA plans will be developed collaboratively, reviewed quarterly, and then updated as needed every 6 months and shared with BJA. TA plans are just another pathway that we use to try to make technical assistance as individualized, responsive, and helpful as possible. So we're really looking forward to working with you to develop the TA plan, and we appreciate your feedback on the process. Next, I'd like you to provide you with an overview of some additional resources, a couple of additional resources that are available to you as a JMHCP grantee. So the first resource is our learning communities that I was mentioning, which are sort of smaller, more intimate training events that we will hold on various topics. And these learning communities provide grantees the opportunity to connect with a national expert and also to connect with the other grantees in attendance. As you can see on this slide, BJA and the CSG Justice Center will be hosting 4 different learning communities in conjunction with national experts in the field over the next year. So we're going to be hosting learning communities focused on gender-responsive services for women, and the expert partner on this learning community will be Becky Ney from the Center for Effective Policy and Practices. She also runs the National Resource Center for Justice-Involved Women. Our second learning community, which is a new one starting out, we're excited to offer, will be focused on high utilizers of costly services. I believe Sarah touched on them earlier, this group earlier, and IJIS Institute is our expert partner here, IJAS. And our third learning community will be focused on information sharing and evaluation. This is a learning community that has also run for several years, so it's a popular one. And we partner with a national expert in this area, Dr. Faye Taxman from George Mason University's Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence. And our fourth learning community, also newly formed this year, we're excited to offer one focused on trauma-informed care, which will be partnered with Dr. Lisa Callahan from Policy Research Associates, or PRA. So learning community activity will begin in early 2020, so you will definitely be hearing more about upcoming events and the schedule from your TA coach. Excuse me, we're very excited for these learning communities to begin, and we hope you will attend and participate. We also invite your feedback and ideas in terms of training in general. Every year we really take into consideration the training ideas and needs that we hear from the field to help us with planning our future training activities. We want to make them as useful as possible to grantees. The next resource I'd like to bring to your attention is a newly released resource we're very happy about on a topic that is quite relevant for Category 3 grantees called Behavioral Health Diversion Interventions, Moving from Individual Programs to a Systems-Wide Strategy. And you can access this resource on the CSG Justice Center website. Although we have a lot of different types of projects, as we know, funded through JMHCP Category 3, and while the opportunities for behavioral health diversion can look different in communities across the country, what we are finding is that leaders are definitely seeking opportunities to build bridges to create systems-wide strategies that have the greatest impact in terms of diversion. So whether this leadership comes from the courts or from law enforcement or the jails, these leaders are learning that there really are these key elements that are needed to create a comprehensive, effective diversion strategy for people with mental illnesses and co-occurring disorders. These key components that make up this comprehensive, effective diversion strategy are described in more detail in this document, so we invite you to read it. And they include developing and engaging collaborative partnerships, understanding the community's behavioral health needs, identifying existing services, supports, and gaps, defining key measures and collecting data, leveraging funding to prioritize interventions, and measuring and sustaining progress. Assisting jurisdictions to consider diversion strategies using a cross-systems perspective is a key goal of the JMHCP and the main focus of this grant track. So you will be discussing this topic much more detail throughout the TA process and answering questions in the P&I guide about your coordination efforts and diversion strategies. And last but not least, one more resource. I can't resist the opportunity to mention our CSG Justice Center monthly newsletter, which is a really great way to stay informed about upcoming trainings and new resources and funding opportunities and other key developments at this intersection between behavioral health and criminal justice systems. So if you have not already done so, we really strongly encourage you to sign up for this newsletter through the CSG Justice Center website. And with that, I'm excited to move us into the next section of our webinar today. We are very grateful to have two JMHCP grantee team members, really team leaders here today. Excuse me. They're going to describe their projects, share their experience as grantees and lessons learned with us. And so, without further delay, I'll turn it over to our first grantee presenter, who's Karen Chappell, the Executive Vice President of Operations at Coastal Horizon Center, who will discuss the JMHCP project work out of the city of Wilmington, North Carolina. Karen?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be with you. We have a project that I think everyone in the New Hanover County and actually across North Carolina has become extremely excited about. The project is called RESET. It stands for, we always have to have acronyms, of course, in the criminal justice system, Reentry Systems for Effective Treatment. And the proposal that we put in to BJA was really to focus on women with co-occurring disorders. And as I'm sure many of you know, a very difficult population. And it's within a jail, which even makes it even more difficult in many ways. The population, anybody over 18 years of age who was a female who had a co-occurring disorder and was high risk, high need. The program itself was 6 months in length, and we had 4 phases that we worked through with the project. It was the beginning with the pre-release phase, where we did multiple screenings and assessments. We started off with the TCUDS-V, the VRANT, the CMHS for women, the CCS, and then we moved right on to the assessment process so that the woman could transition out of the jail immediately into treatment services. Stabilization was the next phase, and this really was to get them involved and engaged in treatment for their co-occurring disorders, while also trying to address other community needs. We would immediately place them into recovery housing if, in fact, they did not have housing of their own. We would obviously link them to services in the community that were desperately needed by these women. Maintenance phase was 30 to 60 days prior to aftercare. And this really was when they had already completed their intensive outpatient treatment. They had been, if in fact in need of MAT, medication-assisted treatment, were placed on medications, and then working directly with the staff to stabilize employment and housing for the future. And finally, the aftercare component. I make it sound very easy when I describe it that way. And believe me, we had many challenges with Reset. One of the major challenges, and I think anybody who is listening to us today that is involved with the jail can surely appreciate this, was the space requirements. When we were going in, we were obviously needing space that was confidential to be able to screen and also assess the women. And so that was a challenge for the jail because of just overcrowding and all those aspects of jail life. The other piece was we would schedule interviews and then the woman would bond out. That has been a challenge, I think, historically for women in the system, which I'll talk a little bit about as far as gender-specific responses. One of the other challenges, I think, that we worked through was just trying to make sure that we had the staff who were the most appropriate to provide the services. And when we started the project, we had a staff person who was very qualified as far as assessments and co-occurring disorders, but did not have the passion that we needed for the position. Ultimately, moved on to another position, and we hired a person who really did have the passion. I think that's probably the best move that we made during this process. The challenges that we had were really to address not only the gender-specific issues, as you all can imagine, and you can tell I'm from the South with y'all, including the relationship with partners, the children, or lack thereof children, trying to deal with both of those in the community coming out of a short period within the jail. And for most of them, they had long-standing relationships. They were homeless when they came into the program. They did not have employment, and so they were heavily dependent upon their partners. And to work through that dependency was one issue. The other issue, again, as I'm sure you all can appreciate, was trauma, and trying to address many years of trauma that these women had experienced for a good period in their lives and had never been treated. The substance use disorder was also a strong influencer of obviously behaviors, but because of where we're located and because of what you've probably heard about Wilmington, North Carolina, we have not only an opioid crisis, but it has been very difficult for our community to deal with. And when we looked at the data that we had for the GMHC, we found that about 50% of the women came in with opioid dependence, along with substantial mental health issues. So again, very difficult population, I think, to try to assist. When you look at some of the pieces that we really engaged in the program, I think probably not just the clinical piece, but all of the wraparound services that we developed within the community have really sustained the program. I think the other thing that we did that I think made the program successful was to develop a very strong advisory committee. And the advisory committee included, as you can imagine, all the stakeholders that you're going to be working with within your preparation of your guide. including the justice system, treatment, and housing, and anything else in the community that might be of importance to your program. But I think that because that advisory group developed their own passion was because of the people who were involved in the project, the staff, and needless to say, the women we were serving. Successes were many, and I'm trying to focus on just a few. I think that when the staff think back about what we've been able to accomplish and continue with this program, it has been huge. And I think that for me, I'm just going to try to focus on probably data, the fact that we had evaluators who became just as passionate about the program as we were, and then talk a little bit about the outcomes. As far as the evaluators, I can't say enough about UNCW, University of North Carolina, in Wilmington. We had two evaluators who are very well recognized within drug courts across the country, but had not really been involved in a project like this before. And they both became actively involved, not just in the advisory functions, but also to assist us with our guide when we were working through it, as was mentioned before, but also to bring data to us on a continuous basis so that we could always take a look at ourselves and say, is this working, is it not working? And what tweaks do we need to make? They have continued with us. We've added another evaluator since then, but the two first evaluators have been dramatic in the success of the program. I think that one of the other successes, and this is huge for us, as I mentioned before, since we have such an opioid overdose and addiction problem in North Carolina and in Wilmington specifically, the jail had historically not been interested in introducing medication-assisted treatment. And during the time that Reset was in the jail, we continually were addressing it with staff and with the medical contractor, because the majority, obviously, of the women that we're serving were addicted to opioids. And because of the jail's inability to provide MAT, the women were obviously detoxed in jail and then coming out and receiving treatment. We are really excited to now be working with the New Hanover County Sheriff's Department to put together a medication-assisted treatment program within their jail. And I think this really came because of a presentation where we had invited down the Assistant Secretary of DHHS in North Carolina to present our evaluation results at that point with the jail staff. And at the end of the presentation, he was so taken by what Reset was doing that he said, we would like to do something to make sure that we can continue not only this program, but also the services provided in the jail. But we would like to think about medication-assisted treatment as being one of those, and offered grant funding to provide that. So it's going to be a challenge for us now to get it operational, but I think that's a huge success for our detention center and for the program. The other piece that I would mention is just looking at the data. As I said, we continually did that, is the majority of the folks coming in, whether they completed ultimately successfully or unsuccessfully, housing was a huge issue, and employment, of course, was also a huge issue. When you look at the populations after they exit, the majority had not only employment, but about 94% also had housing, and that was stable housing. when you look at the comparison between those who were successful and those who were unsuccessful, you can still see a dramatic change with the individuals who were unsuccessful, which I find exciting too. When I think about the major success in my mind, I always have to lead back to the women that we serve. And one of them, which Allison actually knows well because of telephone calls, was a lady who graduated from Reset and had a long history in prison and in jail, and had decided to see if she could become a peer support specialist, which she did. And she ultimately applied for a position within Reset, and she became our first peer support specialist for the Reset program. And as a graduate, obviously, she knew exactly what she had been through to become successful, and was dramatic in the changes that we saw within the women we serve. So I think, to me, that's a huge success. I would also recommend that with the TA assistance that's offered, one of the things that I think was probably the most helpful for us was we had a team of 4 to 5 people working on the project. And we, of course, came up with outstanding ideas, but you need to talk through, as I'm sure you all can appreciate, your ideas and the challenges you have with folks from the outside, and to get a educated perspective on what might be different than what you're seeing. I mean, Wilmington is not a large city. We really needed some expertise from other areas, and it was always a wonderful opportunity when we would discuss these challenges to then be hooked with another grantee who could assist us, or somebody who had already completed their project. I think that for us was extremely successful with the TA process. One of the major things I think that everybody looks at for projects like this is recidivism. And we had a goal of reducing recidivism approximately 6%, 5 to 6%. At the time when we got our grant, the recidivism rate was 41 to 42%, and we had hoped to decrease it to 35%. Ultimately, after we completed the 100 folks that we served, the outcome was 31.3%, and that's for whether you were successful or unsuccessful in the program. Again, for those who were successful, it was 25%. So I think that's fun to look at. I think the project itself will continue because of sustainability that we created during the project by the advisory board, by meeting with grantees, and ultimately receiving another federal grant, a county grant, and City of Wilmington's assistance. So I'm very open to questions. I appreciate the opportunity to be asked to present. I hope this would be helpful to each of you, and we'll take any questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen. We really appreciate all your information and insights on Project Reset. And next, we are also very excited to welcome Dr. Holly Howitt, who's the Executive Director at Beacon Community Connections. Holly will be discussing 2 grant projects through the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office in Louisiana. Holly?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I want to talk about where we are. We're not quite as advanced as Karen and her project. We received a fiscal year 2017 Justice and Mental Health Category 2, which was a planning grant, and we used that to develop a pre-arrest diversion program that I'll talk about in just a minute. And while we were working on that, we applied for a Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Grant Category 3 Implementation Grant for fiscal year 18, and we received that. So that grant started in January of 2019. So we're kind of, all the stuff that y'all were talking about with the planning guide earlier, we just finished that and submitted it, and we're happy to report a couple of weeks ago our implementation guide was approved by our federal project officer, so we're getting ready to actually implement. So I'll talk a little bit about what our project is, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about things that have happened to us this year, things that we think were good, and maybe some challenges that we had. So our grant is law enforcement based, and we're really focused on two aspects. We're focused on a pre-arrest diversion program and also on data integration. We feel like these two things go hand in hand, that without access to good data across stakeholders and across systems, we're not able to effectively connect people to the resources that they need and divert them to the right place. So with our data integration, what we're doing is we are building a data system that is more like a network. It's not really a database. It's more like a network where people can, stakeholders, so like law enforcement, hospitals, mental health providers, non-clinical case managers, things can log in and provide information that the individual agrees to share, information about an individual with a mental health, with a mental illness or co-occurring substance abuse problem, and share information so that when an officer is going out onto the scene, he can log in, he or she can log into their the system through their laptop or tablet or mobile device, whatever they're using, and be able to see something so that they have more information about this individual before they even enter the scene. It helps keep the officer safer. It helps keep the individual and any family members or friends that happen to be there. This helps for better decision making. And so that extends also on to working with hospitals. So if they're transported to the emergency department, really having the hospital staff having access to things that have been going on in the past with the individual, and even being able to see a copy of the affidavit that officers have written about what they saw when they encountered the individual in their home or in the community, can be very helpful in making a decision about whether to order some kind of protective custody, things like that. So we're very excited about what we're doing with that. We are in the process. We've been designing and building our data integration tool. We're hoping to have it ready in January when we actually launch our pre-arrest diversion program. So a little bit about our pre-arrest diversion program. We had originally looked at mobile crisis units and co-responder units, and that the sustainability of that was going to be beyond the ability of our law enforcement and corrections agencies to maintain. So we started looking in different directions, and what we settled upon was something where a law enforcement officer will do a brief mental health screener, which is something that was developed in Canada and is now being used in several jurisdictions across the United States. And so we're going to be using that too. It's a very brief screener that was designed for law enforcement officers to be able to use to collect some very basic information about someone's mental state and whether they may be suffering from a mental crisis or a mental illness. So officers will do that, and if the person screens positive on that, they will then be able to, through the data integration tool I was talking about before, be able to send a referral to a non-clinical case manager that will then receive that referral and either make contact with them immediately over the phone or make contact within one business day to do some further assessments on that. They will do a risk need assessment that is very similar to what is done in our local jail that uses a variety of tools, including the TCU criminal thinking scale, the TCU drug screener, the proxy, and I believe there's one other tool that I'm blanking on right now. But they'll complete that along with the, other intake procedures to identify what that person needs and also arrange for that person to be seen in the community by a licensed mental health professional within 7 days. And so we're working out mechanisms where if they're able to come into our public mental health agency, they'll be able to do that. And if not, we're working with a couple of private providers that have a home health option where a psychiatric nurse practitioner, somebody would be able to actually go out to the home or wherever, whatever community the person was if they weren't able to transport out. And then from there, the non-clinical case manager and the licensed mental health professional work together to develop and implement community care plans and follow that individual for approximately 6 months. It could be longer if they do, and it could be shorter. So we have yet to implement all of this. As I said before, we're just wrapping up our first year of our 3-year grant. And so the first year, pretty much we were waiting on our budget to be approved. And then once we got that approved at the end of March, we were able to officially start working on our implementation guide. I will recommend that even if you're waiting on your budget to be completed, that doesn't mean that you can't still meet and looking at and working on the implementation guide. You just may not be able to receive any of the funding for that. But the sooner you get started, you can probably end on time. So we were able to, over the next 6 months and towards the, a little after October 1st, we were able to submit our implementation guide, and it took about 6 weeks, I would say, for us to get approval from the feds on that. So that was pretty good, and we're now just doing some final touches, getting everything ready, doing some data sharing agreements and things like that to get stuff ready. So just like some basic things as we were going along and doing our, both the planning guide and the implementation guide, one of the things that was helpful to us was looking at the guide. It can seem like a lot of paperwork, like there's a lot of pages to it, there's a lot of additional things that are needed. So just breaking that down into small parts was very helpful to us, and giving like 2 or 3 people a section to work on that matched their needs, their expertise, and what they were able to provide for that, and then kind of reassembling it almost like a jigsaw puzzle. We did not necessarily do each section sequentially. We just kind of did them somewhat in like groups of 2 to 3 people, and then coming back together and presenting it to our large group, which that also reminds me. So we had an advisory group, which is our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, or CJCC. That was our large advisory board that was pretty much just wanted to review things at a very high level. We also have what we call the Justice and Health Collaborative. That's something that was started, we've had in place since 2015 when we became part of the Stepping Up initiative. I know that was mentioned earlier. I can't speak highly enough about the Stepping Up initiative and the tools that they have to help you come together as a team. And because we had done that previously, doing the planning and implementation guide was much easier for us, having been through that process before. So we also had the Justice and Mental Health, so our Justice and Health Collaborative, that is really our work group. That's our worker bees that really get down and into the planning and will be on the front lines of the implementation. So breaking that down was very effective. I'd also say that we had an excellent third-party evaluator, research partner. It's RTI International. They're also from North Carolina. They have been phenomenal. They were with us on our planning grant, and they've continued with us on our implementation grant. They were really able to help us in both the planning grant. We collected some baseline data, and then now we are collecting some additional baseline data to make sure that we meet all of our performance measure tools, so that we're ready to get started and we have all the baseline data that we need. I would say that that's one thing that to start thinking about early. We didn't necessarily think about that early, and I wish we would have thought about it a little earlier, because I think it would have helped our planning if we had if we had looked at baseline data and how that was going to play into the planning guide. Let's see, I also would like to say that when you're looking at your target population, it's just as important to define who is in your target population as it is to define who is not in your target population. So kind of looking at that question both ways, that was very helpful to us. I talked about when we did an inventory of our evidence-based services, we went beyond what we were just doing through the grant, and we talked a lot about stuff that we would refer to that maybe the grant is not paying for, but our grantee participants would maybe be referred to that or would benefit from that. So I would encourage you all to do that too. I think that helps create system linkages and help your project not exist in a silo, which will also help with the sustainability. And I think that's pretty much all that I have to say. I'm definitely available for any questions if anyone has any, but I'll go ahead and stop now. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Holly, and thank you again to both you, Karen, and Holly for both of your descriptions of your grant work, your wonderful tips and suggestions. I know the new grantees are really going to benefit from your lessons learned and experience. So thank you so much for participating today. So now we will head into the question and answer portion of the webinar today. And we're going to respond to as many questions as possible in the time remaining. So just as a reminder, you can type in, chat in your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screens. You can please feel free to ask questions about the grant in general, about any part of the grant process, the technical assistance, etc. Also, if you have direct questions for either Holly or Karen, we'll be happy to field those as well. As we're taking questions, we're also going to advance the remainder of the slides ultimately before we finish, so that you can see some other information we have about resources, presenter contact information, and our CSG Justice Center newsletter sign up. And remember that this webinar has been recorded, and your TA coach will be sending you a link to the recording once it's available. It'll also include a copy of the slides if you're interested, so you'll be able to access all the information contained in this PowerPoint. Okay, so we have some questions coming in, and I think the first question, probably, Sarah, I'll direct it towards you. So we have a couple of people asking about where they can find the P&I guide and when it'll be available.
Yes, what a great question. So we actually will be able to send out the planning and implementation guide to you today. We're also going to put it on our website. So we just got approval yesterday, so it'll go on our website in the next few days. Provide it to our TA coaches and make sure they all send it to you as follow-up to this webinar as well. This webinar will also be recorded, so we will have a link to that for team members who might benefit but weren't able to make it.
Great. So we have a couple of related questions. I think I'll also direct to Sarah, so maybe I can combine them, I think, into one question. So we have different grantees asking whether they can start their planning process if they don't have budget approval yet, or if they still have to do some RFPs for a contracted provider.
Yeah, so if you are not sure whether you have budget approval for your grant, I would recommend that you contact your state policy advisor, which is either Nikisha Love or Tracy Williams-Lee, and they should be able to tell you where you are in that process. And people while they're waiting for their budget approval, it's really up to you and your team whether you're able to start activities. The issue would be in terms of reimbursement for those activities. I think and then there was another piece of the question as well. So that was the budget piece.
Also wanting to know if you can begin your planning process if you still are in the process of doing RFP for contracted providers.
Yes, so you can start your planning process, and I would say it depends on the type of contract in terms of which sections might be good to complete or not complete. If you're trying to develop a request for proposal for a contract with an evaluator, you probably want to save that data collection section and the evaluation for a little bit later, but you could certainly complete the target population section and go through some of the other sections. So I would say, yes, you certainly can, and then once you have that contractor on board, you could invite them to the sections that would be most relevant.
Great, thanks, Sarah. A grantee is asking, or an attendee is asking, what do we do if we have not yet heard from our TA coach?
So if you haven't heard from your TA coach, you can feel free to reach out to me. This is Sarah Wurzburg, and my email will be available at the end, and we can chat it in the chat box. I think each of them, we're given certain points of contact through Department of Justice, and that's not always necessarily the point person. Sometimes that's the sheriff, the CEO of a behavioral health organization, and it sometimes takes us a few emails to get to the right point of contact. So it might be that we didn't have everyone's contact information either. So each of the TA providers already made some attempts to reach out, but we'd love to make sure that you're connected, and I'm happy to do that.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I want to make sure I read this question specifically. It may be something that we would relay to BJA, but I'll let you answer that, Sarah. So an attendee is asking, is it feasible to speed up the overall grant process? We have partners that cannot go into the third year because they're having difficulty with the matching funds, and they're concerned that they might not be able to provide that in the third year. Any suggestions of how we should follow up?
I would follow up with your state policy advisors from the Bureau of Justice Assistance directly. If there is a match requirement, then it's the expectation that match requirement would be met from the Bureau of Justice Assistance perspective, but you would need to work with them specifically on that. So either Nikisha Love or Tracy Williams-Lee are your points of contact there, and they'll be able to specifically work through this discussion with you. Very common issue and very common question, and they will be able to give you the best directions on this.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Another question, is the P&I guide the same for all categories of JMHCP grants? Sarah?
Oh, yes. So it was a question about the planning and implementation guide?
Is it the same for all categories of
Is the planning and implementation guide the same?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. No, there's a different planning and implementation guide for each of the grant tracks. So some folks within this cohort may have been a previous awardee, like Holly mentioned that she had previously been a planning grant or a Category 3 grant, or 2 grant, and now she's a Category 3. Those guides are actually different. So each of the guides are different. So you're not going through the same process that you may have gone through in Category 1 or Category 2. All 3 of those guides have been approved and we'll have them online, but you want to make sure that you work on the one provided by your TA coach, which will be the Category 3 implementation and expansion guide. So making sure that you're actually filling out the correct grant category when you're starting this is really important.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And one more question for you, Sarah, and then if we have time, we'll fit in a question for each for Karen and Holly. So Sarah, an attendee is asking, is there any required travel for the Category 3 grantees? Do you have tentative dates that we could pencil in for now?
That's a great question. So on past grants, there was some requirements in terms of an in-person meeting. This current fiscal year, there wasn't a requirement under the grant for that, so we don't have any tentative dates for that. If we have the ability during the 3 years of the grant to have an in-person meeting, then we'll work with you on that as we get more information and as we work with Department of Justice to be able to plan that. But we do have a lot of fun distance learning events through our learning communities coming up.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And so I have a question each for Karen and Holly. So Karen, I'll start with you. Are you still on?
I am.
Oh, great. So a question about, you mentioned your great evaluation partner, University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and so the grantees are wondering, can you describe a little bit about how you found your evaluation partner?
We have a long-standing relationship, Coastal Horizons does, with UNCW to bring in folks who are trying to get their LCSWs or CSACs or LCASs. So we probably have at any point in time 20 to 30 students from UNCW assisting us. And in that process, because there's so many of them on our campus, we were able to identify the two evaluators that I mentioned. And they have both the criminal justice background, but also a sociology background. So it was kind of like a marriage, so to speak, that was perfect for the project.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. I know that a lot of grantees are looking for ideas on how to create these types of collaborations or find partners in a local university is always a good place to start. And Holly, a question for you. Wondering if you can describe, you described, and it's clear from your 2 grant awards now, projects now, that you have a strong partnership with your local law enforcement entity, the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Department. So we're curious about how that got started. How did you set up and how did you build such a strong partnership with the Sheriff's Office?
So I really think it started with our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. In 2015, they recognized the over-incarceration of people with mental illness as a priority issue, and so from there we started reaching out. The Stepping Up initiative is just getting started, and again, I can't speak highly enough about that, so we're able to partner with them. And then also during that, shortly after that, under the Obama administration, there was a data-driven justice initiative that was started that we're also able to be part of. That initiative is still going on. It's being jointly run through the National Association of Counties, NACO, and also Arnold Ventures, which used to be called the Arnold Foundation. And so you can Google either of those and find out about data-driven justice initiative. And then it just really took a lot of time and people coming together and working through things. So we've been at it for several years. I will say, to kind of piggyback on what Karen was talking about with finding an evaluator, we were able to find RTI through our association with the Data-Driven Justice Association. We were able to meet with them and kind of came up with some projects. But if you are looking, another great resource is MIT has a Poverty Action Lab. And part of what they do with the Poverty Action Lab is they love to link researchers with people looking for program evaluation. And so you can Google them, and they have a criminal justice section, and you can, I can't remember what the name of the lady that's running it, or maybe it's a guy now, what the person's name is, but they've been helpful too with us on some other projects. And just for one final thing real quick, I did see a question about our data integration piece. I don't really have time to go more into detail about that, but I will say we are using Salesforce, and we have a software consultant that is customizing Salesforce for us. Salesforce has a tool called the Community Cloud, which is how we're building our referral network on top of that Salesforce application.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Holly. We appreciate it. Well, we're at time, so we're going to wrap up, but I really can't thank our presenters enough, and to all of you in attendance today, thank you so much. We're looking forward to working with you, and please see our resources slide if you're interested in the Stepping Up initiative or any of the other resources that were mentioned in particular today. We have those links. And also, you'll find our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to Sarah if you're wanting to know more about who your TA coach is going to be. So we really look forward to working with you, and congratulations again on your JMHCP Category 3 award. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.